Well, we'll get started. This is part of a session of conversations with members of the Agricultural and Applied Economics Association. And just really excited to have a great panel of three speakers who have made their career outside of academia. And I know that they'll each bring their unique perspective, and I'll introduce each of them and let them tell you a little bit more about themselves and their career path. And then I think at the end of each of them introducing themselves, we'll open it up for some questions and some dialogue. So I'm just going to go alphabetical by last name. So I'm going to start with my classmate and my friend, Jason Brown, who earned a PhD at Purdue University and is now at the Kansas City Federal Reserve. So Jason, take it away.
Well, thank you. We were asked to just kind of generally talk about, our career, our career path. And so I thought I'd start off by just telling you a little bit about my background. So I'm originally from Prairie Creek, Indiana. It's a small farming community about an hour and a half southwest of Indianapolis, and just kind of grew up in that rural area, and then decided to go to Purdue, and I started off in agricultural systems management major, which is in the Ag Biological Engineering department at Purdue, and I also pursued a minor in food and agribusiness management. And after, as I was approaching graduation in 2001, the job market wasn't exactly the best, but still I had some choices whether I was going to go on to grad school in ag engineering, or if I was going to look at the job offers I had, which was at the time Farm Credit Services and Cargill. And so ultimately, because of the internships that I had in the summer, where I worked for a farm inputs location in my hometown, I worked for Monsanto and BASF. I decided I wanted to go ahead and work for Cargill. And I started off in what was called Ag Horizons division, which was some version of their grain division combined with their farm inputs locations. So I worked kind of in an operations capacity for Cargill for a few years, and I really got interested in international trade and biofuels, and just seeing the decisions that were being made at the export facility I worked out in Northwest Indiana. I really began to become intrigued, like, how were these decisions being made? Like, what economic forces were at play? And so I decided to go back to Purdue to pursue my master's degree. And so I went back to Ag Econ department this time. And I worked under Jess Lohnberg DeBoer on a multidisciplinary project looking at drainage water management. So really initially wasn't what I thought I was going to go back to study and work on, but this interdisciplinary background I had and the industry experience I had really kind of lend itself for me to look at kind of a problem alongside ag engineers and agronomists, as well as my advisor who was serving as the ag economist on the project. And that whole process really kind of made me think about having a more academic oriented career or research focus. And I really became interested in spatial econometrics in terms of trying to measure yield response to drainage technology at a field scale. You can't really do that very easily, and because there's lots of things that end up being omitted and correlated with each other. So long story short, that really led me to think more broadly about what I wanted to pursue. And Purdue offered me a National Needs Fellowship to stay. And I chose kind of rural economics, rural development as my area to focus in for my PhD. And so throughout that, I really chose to focus on location choices in manufacturing in rural areas and how that compared to urban areas. And after I finished my PhD, I took a job with the Economic Research Service, and I worked there for about 3 years. And in the course of that, I really kind of focused on natural resource development and how it influenced local growth and rural growth in particular. And after I was there for a couple years, there was a job opportunity that opened up at the Kansas City Fed for a regional economist position. And so I applied for that, was able to get that job. And so I've been at the Kansas City Fed since January of 2013. It's the longest I've been anywhere. Feels kind of weird when you're somewhere almost 10 years. But that's where I've been the past 10 years. And in my current role, I help lead our regional research and policy function. So the Kansas City Fed is part of the central bank of the United States. And we help our bank president stay up on regional conditions in our 7-state area. And our bank president's a member of the Federal Open Market Committee, which is the group that sets monetary policy on behalf of the United States. So in my role, I get to lead a small group of economists that help contribute to that process. And then I get to do original research. I'm still kind of focusing on natural resource development and local growth. Another strain of my research looks at basically structural forces in the U.S. economy and how those are playing out differently in rural versus urban areas. And so very much like you might think of, a land grant appointment between research, teaching, and extension, I have research and policy work and some outreach along the way with that as well. So we often get asked to go speak to the public on economic outlook issues, but then also share our research at academic conferences, much like an academic would, or to the general public. So that kind of gives you a kind of a broad sense of my career path and kind of what I've been up to the past few years. And be glad to stop here and we can take questions later.
Awesome, thanks, Jason. And it's good to connect even if virtually. So we'll move next to Mary Ledman, who is an economist with Rabobank and has some particular expertise in dairy, and looking forward to hearing her comments. Take it away, Mary.
Great, thank you, Michael. It's a real pleasure to be here with this group today. I never planned on having an academic career, and begrudgingly got a degree in agricultural economics because that was the ante, if you will, the entrance to get into the Foreign Agricultural Service in the 1980s. In 1983, I went to Germany with the FFA, Future Farmers of America, Work Experience Abroad program, and worked on a dairy farm there for 6 months and met the agricultural attaché during that time. And I thought, wow, how do you get this job? Growing up in rural Wisconsin, going to, ag school, you basically were, you were either the extension agent or farm credit at that time, or if you're really smart, you're the veterinarian, right? So, agricultural attaché had no idea that this job even existed. And, how do you get this job? And he said, just get a master's degree in agricultural economics. I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And he said, but, get your undergrad in something, related. We do a lot of communication work here. So an ag journalism or ag com degree followed by ag econ, that's a good ticket. So I punched that ticket at Texas A&M. And one of the other benefits of being an ag journalism major, it was one of 2 majors at Texas A&M that did not require calculus. And so that was great, right? Until you get into grad school, right? It was a prerequisite to have calculus to get into the ag econ master's program. But my work around there was because it wasn't needed for my degree. I was able to take it pass fail, and all those fears of calculus kind of went away with that pass fail opportunity for that class. And I think I enjoyed it a lot more. So some of pivotal decisions in my life, definitely going to Germany. was one of those key decisions, because I thought I was going to old world Europe and would be milking cows out on a pasture. Instead, my host family, they were milking about 125 cows, more than twice the size of the 50 cow dairy that I grew up on. They had a milking parlor, which was, a lot more technology than what we had on our dairy farm. But over the next 3 years of my college career, I watched how that farm changed, because in 1984, just 3 months after I left that farm, the European community put in a quota system, mandatory supply management program. So I saw how that farm changed. The quota was originally put on milk volume. So what did those dairy farmers do? Well, they started breeding their cattle for higher protein and higher butter fat, because there was no quota on butter fat or protein. And those were the key components that the farmers were paid on. So this really kind of piqued my interest in agricultural policy. In my senior year of school at Texas A&M, I wasn't really ready to meet the real world yet, and I stopped by the study abroad office to say, hey, is there any, study abroad opportunities for people going on to grad school? And she said, well, Fulbright fellowships, scholarships or applications are due in 2 weeks, but I've never heard of anyone getting one for agriculture. Well, those were just kind of fighting words for me. And so, and I didn't have a 4.0 grade point. So she didn't think I had any chance of getting this, right? But I did end up getting this, the Fulbright Fellowship, largely because I had German language capability and I had the story behind it, the purpose. Why do I want to go to Germany? Why is this an appropriate study topic? So I went to Germany, worked on the Fulbright, came back to Texas A&M. I had actually started at Foreign Ag Service and then as an intern. So that was kind of one of those tickets that I punched as well, working there as an internship and then coming back. I was working there and I took a leave of absence to come back to Texas A&M to finish the master's degree, in which I wrote my master's thesis on product price formulas as an alternative to the Minnesota-Wisconsin milk price. So I am one of those children who has sat at the kitchen table listening to my dad complain about how the milk price was set, and then actually landed the job in Washington setting the milk price. So it was a situation where I was going to go back to Foreign Ag Service. That was my entire intention. But my advisor at Texas A&M said, hey, you're going to interview with the head of the Texas Ag Statistical Service. And I'm like, why would I do that? I don't want to be with those geeky statisticians. I'm going back to Foreign Ag Service, right? And he's like, listen, the person who's been setting this MW price since 1960 is retiring. And he said, there are very few grad students who actually get to write a thesis and then put it into application. And he said, and oh, by the way, they're going to pay you $10,000 a year more to work for NAS, National Ag Statistical Service, than Foreign Ag Service. And he said, you just need to be there 18 months. You'll then qualify for your grade level 12. And you need to have the grade level 12, at least in those days, to sit for the Foreign Service exam for FAS. So, I consider myself extremely, extremely fortunate to have a wonderful advisor at Texas A&M that really had a pulse on what was going on within USDA, knew this was a relevant topic, and it really set the stage for me to be a dairy economist within the dairy industry today. So. My dad had some health issues around that time, and I actually interviewed with Kraft Foods, which is a suburb of Chicago at the time, for a financial analyst position. And it was kind of interesting because they're like, well, yeah, we get that you're from Wisconsin, but, we really haven't recruited from Texas A&M. So it was kind of like this, courtesy interview, I would say. The point of this story that I want to really, really drive home here is that 2 years later, after having 2 years of experience working with the National Ag Statistical Service, the regulatory body within the dairy industry. Kraft Foods came after me to be their dairy economist, which was a hell of a lot better position than being a financial analyst stuck with a bunch of MBA people. So do not be afraid of taking a government job. There is so much that you can learn in that process that is going to be very, very valuable to the private sector. And in fact, keep in mind, this is like 1990, so I feel like I'm kind of the grandma of this group. Probably one of the most valuable pieces of information I had was the USDA hard copy of the telephone book at that time. So before everything was on the internet, knowing what those contacts within USDA was, like I said, invaluable. So I worked for Kraft as their dairy economist for a couple of years, and then had the chance to have an international career in Germany. I worked for Kraft Jakobshusard, the international branch of Kraft, for a year. And then as luck would have it, I met a guy who worked for Kraft and got married. And we decided one family member per Philip Morris companies back in 1993. And I took a job within 3 months with another dairy company as their head of procurement, which I loved that job. It really, the practical applications, it was my job to set the milk price to our 2,000 dairy farmers that shipped to our plants. It was like a real reality check. It was not in theory. It was all practical know-how, hands-on, and just really loved that job. But it got moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I had married a widower with a 12-year-old boy and 15-year-old daughter. And, 2 years earlier, they're 14, they're 17. We're not moving to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And so Stella Foods, which is now known as Saputo, they offered me 20 hours a week at 2.5 times my salary for 3 years. And that's how I became a consultant. So and I always thought, well, geez, maybe I'll be a consultant when I got married and had kids. Well, I never expected to get married and have kids on the exact same day. So, this has all been very fortuitous for me. And so besides my stepchildren, I have 2 children of my own, and the youngest went off to college in 2018. And Rabobank had seen a presentation that I presented at a industry global dairy conference in Indonesia. And they were looking for a dairy strategist. And I've always thought that Rabobank was a cool place to work, have always respected the research coming out of it, the organization. And I was just kind of over the moon at this stage of my career that they were interested in my skill sets. And so I lead a team of 8 analysts around the world that, we're the internal consultants for Rabobank they've got 30 billion euros lent in the dairy industry around the globe. And, so I feel really fortunate that I have had a career in an industry that I just love.
Awesome. And it's easy to hear that passion there. So thanks so much for sharing, Mary, and should be good fodder for some additional questions. You're not the only one to have spent some time internationally in your career. I know Matt Salois, after being a colleague at the University of Florida, spent a little time internationally, but now was with the American Veterinary Association, but is now with Veterinary Management Group, I think, but he'll get that right for me. And so excited to have Matt here and take it away.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. I better get it right or I'll be in trouble with my new employer. I feel in great company here with Mary and Jason, a little out of my water here, but I'll do my best. I think if you hear something between the two of them and consistent with me, I think sometimes we look at other people's careers and we see the remarkable progress they've made over time and we think, oh goodness, they must have had a 10-year plan and they did it. It's like, no, it was actually far more coincidental than what you might think it is. And so just keep that in mind. And yeah, you know, I won't share the whole life story because that began in the womb, and that's far too long of a story to start with. But I'll skip over the details of why I went into ag econ and applied economics, and start with the first career there, which was, you know, 2008 I graduated, and that was not a pretty year to graduate. If you remember the economic climate there. And so I ended up at the University of Reading in the UK, like Mike was saying, and it wasn't with great intent. It was because the job market in the US was just sour, and it was sour globally too. But there was a little bit of an adventure, you know, I think in that my wife had studied abroad. We had just been married, you know, a month. And I said, you want to go move to England? And she's like, oh, shoot, I just married you. I guess I'm going to have to follow you over there. You know, and there was a bit of a gamble too. It was kind of a fun game of roulette. You know, I couldn't afford to fly out there. You know, it was just, you know, you're a PhD graduate, right? Like you have no money. You just spent it on everything else that you own. And I just got married too. And they said, sure, we'll pay for your flight and your interview expenses. But if we extend an offer and you say no, we're going to ask that you pay that back. I was like, oh, this is interesting here. But you know, it worked out. I went there. It was a great fit. It was a far different of a lifestyle than I ever thought I would have. And the plan was just to be there for a year or so as a postdoc, but ended up being a full-time lecturer position, assistant professor equivalent, and ended up being there for 4 years. And, you know, I was able to immerse myself in different areas. They had a lot of Bayesian econometricians there, and got to dabble in Bayesian econometrics, and that was a lot of fun. And do some grant work. We got to work for some food companies and work for DEFRA, the USDA equivalent over there. And, you know, I thought all through grad school that I wanted to be a career academician, a career academic. But I started to learn along the way that I didn't quite feel the I don't know, the sense of accomplishment after publishing a paper. I mean, I did, but then the more you did that, it was just, I don't know, I just felt like, who's reading this? Because I don't even enjoy reading what I wrote. I'm being a little glib here. I'm sorry, it's just my style. But I started to think of other things that I could do. And we were getting a little homesick. It'd been 4 years, and you know, the separation of our families was a lot on us. So I started looking at university roles, yes, but also some other things. Looked at the Federal Reserve Bank, some really exciting career opportunities, as Jason indicated. And then I came across this funny little role back at the University of Florida, where I did my PhD. Go Gators. And there was a position with the Department of Citrus. They were hiring a director of economics, chief economist. And I thought, citrus, well, I do enjoy a glass of orange juice. This could be a good fit here. And it was interesting because the role was based on the university campus, but FDOC had offices in the heart of citrus country in Florida, in Bartow. But you know, I ended up going for it, and I'm so glad I did, because it made me take economics out of the ivory tower and put it into practical terms. So working with citrus growers, juice processors, all the different industries and companies involved in the production of a tree crop. And it was fascinating, and it was really challenging. I would say I fell flat on my face a number of times trying to provide economic insights in a way that didn't come across as sounding like an academic economist. And that's what we're trained, right? As a master's or a PhD economist, you're trained to talk like that. And that's not how the not economist behaves. And so there were some painful learning lessons there, but I found that I really enjoyed that, because that's where I started to find my why, is being able to provide the insights from an economic perspective and see the practical difference it would make in influencing decision-making within a company or within an organization. And then, you know, just did that for a few years, and again started to get a little I don't know, itchy and wanting to look for something else, and came across this fascinating role with Elanco Animal Health. They were a part of Eli Lilly, the pharma giant at the time. They're now an independent company, and they were looking for an economist with policy, with a bit of a policy background. And in particular, you know, they produce a lot of animal health products, technologies, and they were looking for ways that an economist could support those production technologies. It's no surprise that, you know, there are some food movements out there, and things like providing antibiotics to animals. There are some that don't think that should be done. And so what they were looking for was a team of scientists that they could put together that would act as a think tank for the company, to do research, to do policy work, and advocate for animal health and production technologies in agriculture. And so I worked alongside an MD, an animal welfareist, a sustainability expert, and it was just a fascinating role that really I got immersed in animal health and veterinary medicine as a profession. And that led to where I most recently was as chief economist for the American Veterinary Medical Association. And while I was previously working a lot with food animal and agricultural side of the animal sector, this got me much more engaged on companion. And who doesn't love a good cat or a dog? I don't know. I don't mind petting dairy cows. They smell sometimes, but they are really adorable. And the cats and dogs can smell too, don't get me wrong, but there's something warm and fuzzy about them too. And so, you know, as a continuation of this journey, how to deliver economic insights to veterinarians and veterinary practice owners who, for all intents and purposes, are small business owners for the most part, particularly the independent ones, and help them run their practice as a profitable, economically sustainable enterprise. And it was just, you know, a deeply enjoyable experience, and one that I'm going to cherish as I move into my newest and latest role as of last month as president of the Veterinary Study Groups. We're an organization, a member-based organization, not entirely unlike the AVMA, but we support economic excellence amongst veterinary practices and really try to develop a community of camaraderie amongst veterinary practice owners so that they can share in their challenges and their struggles, how they've overcome them, what strategies and approaches have worked for them, and then share in these learnings in a cooperative way, so that others in a similar situation can thrive. So that's my background in a triple run speed there, but happy to engage in questions, and thanks for the opportunity to meet with you today.
Man, thanks, Matt, and thanks to all three of you. I know I sort of called in some personal chits to get you guys lined up, and I hold all three of you in such great esteem, and you guys have had such amazing careers. And so I think it's really going to add to the tapestry of voices that we've heard in this series of webinars. And with that, it's my distinct pleasure to turn this over to our mentoring committee chair, who has done an amazing job putting this together and keeping these organized. And she's the Distinguished Professor of Sustainability at North Carolina A&T State. And so Kathleen, I'll turn it over to you to moderate our panel.
Michael, thank you so much. And thanks to Mary, Jason, and Matt for your participation. I had, you know, one of these days, Michael picked on my background right away. He said, I see you're on the road. Yes, I'm in a hotel in Washington, D.C., and lo and behold, my computer won't work. And I'm like, something is going on here. You know, these ghost stories about old hotels in D.C. area. I started looking for poltergeists around me and all this stuff. It turns out that I have to turn on a switch, and I had no idea that that's the trick. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. And again, thanks to Michael to identify this cohort that's very, very different from the traditional academic background. And I hope that our audience would interact with our panels, because right now we have plenty of time. That's our purpose. And we have a pretty manageable size of the audience here. If you want to, would you like to just turn on your mic and raise your hand, or put your questions in the chat box? We will start the conversation with the panelists. Michael, you got a question?
Yeah, I'm gonna start us off. I'm gonna cheat and take advantage of being off mute already. So what I'm curious about to hear from all three of you, what's the most challenging question you've gotten from a stakeholder? What was the most challenging question you've gotten from a stakeholder in your career?
Well, you can imagine we get asked lots of questions at the Fed. But me personally, I think the question I come back to was probably in 2019, maybe 2018. I don't know. I've kind of lost track of time. But Iowa State had their inaugural rule development symposium, and they asked me to come speak at it. And I presented some of the work I had done at the Fed over the past few years, looking at how changes in business formation or migration, how those were playing out in small versus the largest urban areas. And, really the core of that work was kind of showing like these smaller places are becoming more static over time. And of course, that's concerning because we need these areas to be more dynamic in order for there to be more growth. And this conference the symposium was full of mayors, city managers, city council members from across the state. And one of the mayors walked up to the microphone, and here's a room of about 500 or 600 people, and he says, "Can you tell me the one thing that I need to do to go back to my town tonight and implement that's going to make the difference?" And obviously, I didn't know that one thing, but I told him, I said, honestly, I don't think there is one thing, right? That's kind of the more that we learn about what makes communities, special. It's all its own kind of recipe, right? It's what are the local assets that they have advantage to, what's the nature of the entrepreneurial climate they have, and then what kind of partnerships do they have at the local and regional level. And so I think personally that's probably the hardest question, even though I had an answer for it. I knew it wasn't going to be satisfactory, but that's definitely one that stands out.
Yeah, I think, it's a general type of question. I think that's the hardest as an industry economist and non-academic. And it goes something along the lines of, now what is the question? So you deliver an economic insight and you think you're delivering this earth-shattering piece of knowledge. And then you get someone who's a business leader or a business owner, and they say, now what? What am I supposed to do with this? Why do I need to know this? And that's, I think, been one of the hardest leaps from being an academic to an industry economist, is that, providing research for the sake of research doesn't really deliver much value in the business, world, truly. And so you're put to task. I think you come in with a tremendous amount of credibility. I'll say this, carrying an economics degree has been really great because there's a trust and a credibility that goes with that. I think that's unmatched in other disciplines. But you are put to the test. And so, always being prepared, if you're going to share some data or a research or a finding, spending a lot less, if any, time on the how you got that, and almost all the time on why they should need to know that in the first place.
So I'm going to take a little different approach here. Keep in mind that I had a consulting business from 1995 to 2017. And I had one base client, and one of the number one things they wanted was my monthly forecast for milk, cheese, butter, non-fat dry milk, and whey powder. And there was no non-compete. If my forecast, I could sell it, market it to anybody else, which was very fortunate given the consulting deal that I had. So, you're put to task, right? As, why should I pay you for a forecast that's always going to be wrong? Right? What's the economic value do you bring to the table? And I even struggled with that as, Mary, we want to hire you. And I'm like, well, how are you going to use this forecast? Right? Because my forecast is the same, whether you are a dairy co-op or an end user of dairy products. But your risk around those prices or your risk tolerance would be different. And so my value wasn't necessarily, I would say the values were the numbers that I put out, but more importantly were the follow-up discussions with the clients about how they were going to use that forecast. And keep in mind, this was 1995. We started a dairy futures about the same time. So the path of those dairy futures, along with my consulting business, just really grew because the guys at the Chicago Board of Trade or Chicago Mercantile Exchange that, you know, that were the traders, the market makers for corn and soybeans, they knew nothing about dairy. And unfortunately, you know, price discovery class at Texas A&M, you know, I had to take trading. And so I was in a very unique position to know how the milk futures were derived. And my agricultural economics training gave me the trading background as well. So I was very uniquely placed at that time.
I see questions started rolling in the chat box. Before we read that question, could you all type a word or two in the chat box so we know the audience background a little bit? Again, we have a pretty small audience today, so if you could put your current situation, are you a assistant professor? Are you a student, a grad student, a PhD candidate, postdoc? Could you please just type your current situation in the chat box so we get a little bit background from each person? But let's start with the chat box. There is a very good question here about being 12-year teaching in academic and what skills that will be needed for this type of person to move into the industry level. So anybody would like to take on that?
Well, first of all, it's great to hear from Jamil. We went to class together, PhD, and she saved my butt in econometrics. So I owe her a debt of gratitude there. You know, first of all, I would say just do it. I mean, sure, there are things that you can do to prepare yourself, but the best preparation is actually experience. And if there's an industry role that you feel like you might be a good fit for, is to jump right in. But beyond that, I would say communication is key here. You know, the difference between giving a presentation at an economics conference versus giving a presentation in the boardroom, very, very different style. And so I think, you know, honing those communication and presentation skills amongst other aspects, that's just one amongst many, but I would say that served me really well the last few years.
I would just say, you know, I'm not worked in the industry as an economist. I worked in private industry before going to grad school. And so I kind of have the reverse experience of using my private sector experience to really leverage and go after, like try to, with the question in mind, what research questions really matter the most. But to follow up on Matt's point, I think one of the skills that I've honed, certainly in the past, you know, 10 years, is the ability to communicate to various audiences, right? So I've learned to be comfortable speaking to 5 people, you know, 200 people, 500 people, whatever, being able to know who your audience is and then, you know, deliver on the content. So I think in industry, that's got to be crucially important, is understanding probably what are the factors that company cares about most, and how could you help them with that. But anyway, I think the communication part is definitely at the core there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's, I would echo those comments. Part of it would, you know, I would like to know more about what you've done in the last 12 years and how that would fit within, you know, the private sector, right? So where are you going to find the greatest amount of applicability there? And when I was at Kraft Foods, it was like, just give me the answer, right? It wasn't so much they wanted to know the background. They trust that we've hired you because you have this background, kind of just give me the answer. And sometimes the patience to know the background was not there in the C-suite, as we would say.
Thank you, and appreciate everybody put your information in the chat box a little bit. I see there is a unique situation about today's audience. Michael, we got more participants from Canada. Did you notice that? we never had these many people from different countries. So this is a very interesting. Obviously, it's something about our storytellers are more attractive to Canadian colleagues. And
well, you mentioned dairy, right? And it's a real sensitive issue. So.
Yeah, I see, because I see somebody from veterinary medicine and agriculture economics, Dr. David Hall. David, could you say a few words about how you got into veterinary medicine and agriculture economics all together in the integrated field? That sounds very interesting. Hi, David.
Hi.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's just a very fascinating to see the diverse background of our audience.
Sure. I don't know if I can say it in a few words, but essentially my undergrad was in animal science and agricultural economics, and I was always interested in international development and economics, and that led me to some work in the area, and I wanted to do a vet degree. I did, and then I worked internationally, and one thing led to another. My PhD is from Texas A&M, Mary, and yeah, there you go. But I do have a question. One of the issues that comes up is we're doing a lot of teaching of other concepts and applied skills in vet med, and one of them is economics and business. And to some degree, I think sometimes we spread ourselves a little too thinly and get a little too diversified, perhaps. And I wonder what the panel thinks about that. It's an important topic, no doubt, but no vet student goes to vet school to become an economist. So there's a bit of resistance in teaching economics, but it's an important topic. As Matt, as you said, they're small business owners, so they should learn about business, of course.
Yeah, that's a great point. Oh, go ahead, Mary, please.
I've ran across several veterinarians that fancy themselves as ag economists as well. Same way with nutritionists. And you can understand, I mean, there is definitely, production economics, right? I think is very valid for veterinarians to have some grounding in, right? And then there's also the business side of running a business, and those veterinarian practices are capital intensive. And so I think having, some of the basic, even sometimes as easy as QuickBooks education is very valuable.
Yeah, and for sure you can go too far. I mean, right. So if you're in school to be a veterinarian, that's why you're in school, to be a veterinarian. By proxy, if you're an independent practice owner, you're also a business manager and a manager of people there. So no doubt, I think, economics as a discipline has virtue and can support, insights for anyone engaged in business. But as Mary said, there's a difference between economics and business management. Economics isn't going to save you if you are managing a team of people and you've got a real party pooper there that's causing some significant conflict in that team, and suddenly productivity's down, people aren't happy, and you've got a disengaged team here. And so, building skill sets around leadership, management, HR, inventory, and operations, I mean, that's going to save you as a practice owner. And, honestly, you look at some of the health professions that they run the spectrum around how well they equip their professionals with the skill set. Dentistry, they go deep in this, and there's a lot of business education that goes into being a dentist, because the expectation is that you're going to become a practice owner. I think we're getting there in veterinary medicine. It's probably not quite as far along, but you're right. You don't want to be stretched too thin, because most veterinarians, they're there to see the kittens and the puppies, right? I mean, that's why they do it. Not all of them, I guess. There's dairy cows, and we don't want to forget that side of things. But yeah, good point, David.
May I give a very quick follow-up to that? The way I've handled it now that I heard your comments is I do teach enough that the students understand how to put together an income statement, cash flow, and a balance sheet. And if they have that much at their disposal, they've learned quite a bit at the end of their program. But what's really important, and I harp on this, is that you don't become a master of preparing those tools, but you at least are able to interpret them, because otherwise the decisions in guiding your practice will be made by your business manager or your accountant or your economist. And when vets understand that concept, they start to bristle and say, I should be in charge in the direction of my practice, not the business manager. So anyway, leave you with that thought.
Thank you, David, for this great question. There is a question here. I think it's applicable for all three panelists, and I will elaborate a little bit. There's a question about how the academic audience could be better collaborated with the industry, and how do we generate value with our partners in private sector. But I will also extend this question to Jason. For the Federal Reserve Bank system, I'm pretty sure you guys also collaborate with industry to a certain level and academic researchers. So I hope that all three of you could elaborate a little bit how to collaborate in general with the academia colleagues, and how the academia colleagues could generate value for private industry, government agencies, or other type of collaborators. Thank you.
Yeah, I would start off by saying we collaborate with a wide range of people for various reasons. It's not just on a research project, right? So if I start at a very high level, I think of our board of directors who have responsibility for our oversight. And so we're collaborating with them, and we're hearing from them on economic conditions in their industries that they represent. And certainly what they're seeing is, and what they report to us, some of them participate in our regional surveys. Businesses are telling us right up front what's going on. And so that's kind of like the leading edge of economic information. And so that's an example of a direct collaboration between the Federal Reserve and say people, broadly speaking, in the economy through our board of directors. We obviously, the Fed has a large role to play as a convener. If you look at some of the conferences that the Fed is involved in, those topics range from agriculture to energy to monetary policy, and everywhere kind of in between. And part of the role as a convener is bringing people together from industry, from research, and from policymakers and practitioners. So that's another way that I would say we collaborate. And of course, yes, on our research, we have opportunities to at least interact with industry on the things that they're seeing, kind of very much how you would approach this in an extension setting, right? You might have an idea of a research question, and you have a chance to kind of go kick the tires on the research question with someone in the community. We have the opportunity to do that with industry people, right? We can hear directly from them what are the issues that's on their mind that they're most concerned about. And then we can then use that information to try to help sharpen your research focus. So those are like some of the ways I can say that we have kind of direct collaboration with different stakeholders.
So Rabobank has 80 analysts in the food and agricultural sector, and an additional 60 in more the macroeconomics, micro and macroeconomics. So 140 researchers around the globe. Internships are the way to get in the door and get experience and collaborate. We've been doing some work here with the Ukraine-Russian conflict and implications from that. And we've actually had contact from key government banks around the world really tapping into our research. And the advantages, we have boots on the ground in a lot of these places. And, there's supply and demand, but there's also market sentiment, right? And so being able to pick up on that is important. But I think I would say internships are a key component.
I think there's a lot of things. It's a great question, Elizabeth. And I've been on both sides of this, having been an academic and doing work for industry partners and now being in industry and working with academics, I would say first and foremost, it's building your visibility and your building an awareness that you can do this work. So I've worked for, companies and nonprofits, and they think if they need to do a market research study, they need to hire a market research company. And they just don't know. They don't know that they can go to an academic to do that. And in fact, those organizations, the work will cost 3 times as much and the quality will probably be half as good as you think it is. And so thankfully I came from an academic background. So when I was put into those decision-making roles to know like, okay, we could go with XYZ company, but we're going to pay 6 figures. And there's probably going to be, survey bias because they don't know how to design a survey as credibly as someone over here at Purdue University. So let's go to Purdue University and see if they can work with us. And then, it's a win-win there. So I think, putting yourself out there, the more that you do engage with industry and apply to those, RFPs, that's going to help. And obviously, it's different timing too. So industry typically operates in a much faster timetable. It doesn't mean that there can't be a negotiation process, but be willing to maybe expedite things more than what would be typical within a traditional academic research program. And honestly, it goes both ways too. There are things that industry can do to be better partners for academics. When I've done these types of RFPs and know that I want to work with a university partner, I try to make sure that there's a publication out of this for them. And it's not just about that. There's funding and there's money involved and things like that. But I understand that that's important currency in the academic world, that there's going to be a lot less motivation working with an academic partner if they're going to be doing this work and it's just about the grant dollars and they're not going to be getting a publication out of this. So trying to make sure that there's some credible work involved too, that's going to lead towards publication. And honestly, what I've had to convince a lot of the industry partners that I've worked with is that that's a good thing. You want that academic publication because it adds credibility to your work and there's value in that.
Thank you so much. As we get close to the end of our session, I know Don Siomany is listening here. Don, how are you? And for Don, who had served as the president of AAEA, she always asked me this question, Kathleen, get him to talk about the value of AAEA. So before we close this session, would each one of you share a little bit your experience with AAEA and what you would like to see us improving to help future colleagues, students, peers, and so on and so forth?
Oh, I guess make it easier for someone in the industry to be a part of AAEA. I think, I hope this doesn't come across as complaining or criticism, but it's difficult to engage because the interests don't often overlap, I think. And, just being in industry, we write papers and we try to publish things, but it's not going to have the econometric rigor that I think AAEA, requires. And I get that. I think that makes sense, but maybe there can be a track or a section for industry that provides that value to that audience. And I think, again, it is a two-way street. What can industry do for AAEA to bring value back to, supporting career networking and mentoring for those that might be interested in an industry career? I think those would be helpful approaches.
I think for me, Kathleen, if I'm being honest, I was much more active in AAEA 6 or 7 years ago than I have been the past few years. And I did serve as the chair of the Community Economics Network, which is now called the Community and Regional Economics Network. And Don's certainly familiar with that group and has been involved in that group for a very long time. But much of the nature of my work has not necessarily always been as valued within AAEA as, say, other topics. And I don't necessarily hold that against AAEA. And so I've just kind of had to look, elsewhere for other places to have outlets for my work. Having said that, though, I think there's great value in just, the ability to network at AAEA and, further build potential research collaborations there And really it gives you a sense of community kind of professionally, right? I mean, many of us are kind of our world, so to speak. We immediately interact with people around us and may not really understand what else is going on or what we're trying to do. But the advantage of going to a place like AAEA is that you have a chance to kind of interact with people that are maybe trying to accomplish similar things. And so I would say that's definitely what I've valued the most out of the times that I have been at AAEA.
So over the years, I've used the access to lit reviews, like putting in a subject title that and looking for recent research that has been done on it. That's worked very well, and I've appreciated that.
Anyone else has any? Mary, go ahead.
I want to, the other part of that is if I'm looking for talent and I'm looking for a subject matter expert, I'm looking at the names on that journal article as well.
Thanks, Mary. Any other feedback for AAEA? Because again, Dawn Thelman is right here. She can definitely bring the message back to the board and strengthen our service and our benefit. I mean, over the years, I think all the presidents have spent significant time, especially recently. We spent a lot of time to strengthen the mentorship service, the connection with non-academic audience, and really trying to achieve a better value. That I think the better way to say it is we want to make sure when people join AAEA, they do recognize the value from all different purposes. So anybody else on this call, or that you can hit the unmute button. We don't control your unmute button. So if anybody would like to unmute yourself, would you like to give us some feedback about how AAEA could enhance our value and the service to the general membership? Dawn, you want to say a few words?
Sometimes I just want to be the audience, Kathleen, but I totally agree with everything that was said. Jason, I'm one of those people who's actually tried to keep the regional folks from not leaving. And I do feel like the sections have done some amount better, although to Matt's point, the industry one has never been quite as active as, say, the extension one. Like, we're going to lose the extension folks. And now that they have their own section and can really almost run their own mini meeting and mini organization under the umbrella of AA while still dovetailing into all the networking of the big meeting, that helps. Regional has done that to some degree, and I think that's why we've kept regional alive. But for industry, it's been much harder because, as Matt said, with the exception of extension, but that's pretty farm gate and pretty sometimes too narrowly topicked. We don't know that we're bringing the type, because now I go to industry meetings and I just realize it's just an entirely different version of what we'd call research, but it's very good research. And so I think except for that talent identification, we have a challenge there, and maybe we just can't be good for everybody. But to Mary's point, I'm glad to hear that, because we didn't get to it because this has been a disruptive time that I've been president, but I really do think we could do a much better job with our directory in some kind of way besides lit reviews and just having articles out there to let people identify our members that can help them with good research, like when you need a good survey design, like someone said, or if you're looking to hire, how you find someone, particularly people who don't want to do just the academic track. So it's good to hear your comments to reinforce things that I think are gaining some momentum we might need to do. So we're a constantly changing organization, and we know we have room for improvement, but we're just glad you all still do stick around and that we maintained our membership during a very disruptive time. And always will take feedback about how to make it better.
Kathleen, do we have time for one quick comment for me?
Sure. Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. Dawn, I think mostly addressed to you, I think. I wonder if AAEA has considered an industry type of, I'll call it journal or publication, directly reaching out to industry members or those who have stories to report or interesting studies from industry related applied economics. And for example, in the veterinary profession, we have journals that are certainly cover scientific articles, but they also span topics that are related to application of maybe economics or other disciplines relevant to practice management or relevant to decision making that don't require scientific rigor in terms of statistical analysis, etc., but are very interesting for our members to read. And they don't read the academic journals. They should do, but they don't always read the academic journals. They're more interested in some of the applied topics. And Matt, you mentioned Elanco Animal Health, for example. New pharmaceuticals are always coming down line. We'd like to know more about them before they come to market, and comparisons of the benefits of vaccines and so on and so forth. So I'm sure with food applications and other types of industry applications, processing and so forth, I'm sure there's scope for it, but I suppose it's a question of cost and management and who's going to be the editorial board and so forth.
Well, I think it's, well, of course, this won't be true, but the new journal we just started under Tim Beattie is meant to be stuff that's not so rigorous, but everybody I know who's put in a test case, it's still taking a very academic tone. And then of course, you know, choices is out there, but it's got a very policy tone and almost as too light. So, you know, the other thing I didn't understand is when we started the AETR journal, which, well, it's a publication, we're considering making it a journal. But when they came to the extension section, that's actually how they started rebranding themselves. It's like, everyone thinks we're just teaching now. Like, so they actually challenged some of the extension sections to like, extension can include not just farm gate, like this is cost benefit models or whatever, but you know, like I think that could be one place where if you can think of extension as being extension to industry, they would take things like, you know, there's going to be three new options for, let's say the conservation title, and there's gonna be 3 new options for some carbon sequestration that farms are going to have an option to like choose, and they're all new and it's a very thing. And there's no data to build a statistical model on, and it's scenario analysis. I think they would totally do that, but maybe it just takes I mean, we're maybe past the time too, where this isn't about publishing per se. This is about, you know, some of these grand challenges reports where an industry also could actually come to us and say, we need the credibility of academics to be truthing some things that we need to see some comparisons on. And it may be less the publication than like we put together. I'm thinking of like grand challenges reports or something like that, where, you know, it's instead you almost like commissioning the AAEA that you have the right members to weigh in on this. Help us weigh in on this, and it becomes kind of almost like an AAEA sanctioned report, or you could imagine that being a workshop, that then the deliverable of the workshop is one of these reports where instead we kind of harness the talent. And instead of thinking a very static long-term publication process, we put together something that can have a quicker turnaround, which industry would want anyway. And 80% of our membership won't be interested at all. But the 20% who'd be really interested and are teaching classes like this and engaging with industry would jump on it like flies. And those are the people you want anyway. I think we could innovate something like that. But the problem is we need industry leading us, because even me pretending I know what I'm talking about here knows I wouldn't frame it right, because I've been in academia too much in my career, but I know how to hop on something someone else is leading and contribute where I need to contribute. So that, I think there's some great ideas we could do. And I'm actually gonna have more time when I'm not president anymore. So if anybody wants to like pilot one of those with me and get some funding from USDA to make it happen as a pilot, because I think in addition to actually having the workshop and deliverable, we would want to kind of document a process we did to make it work effectively. I think that'd be super fun. The Fed's for instance, the Fed's gotten really good at doing these. They kind of commission these hot topic reports on rural America, get some good experts on it, turn it around really fast. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to do that exact same thing. And again, a bunch of our members won't care, but the ones who care will be so excited we're doing it. I've talked too much, sorry.
This is a great brainstorm session. This is a great. So it seems like we have a volunteer, David, here. So we're gonna grab David. Would you like to share your email with Don if you don't want to put your email in the public domain, and then just continue this conversation? I think that's very good. And of course, we have Mary, Matt, and Jason. You got a handful. I know you do. Fed publishes absolutely outstanding reports. I actually use those reports to teach. I do. They're much better than the textbook. It's a current. It's a cutting edge. It's excellent information about what happened around our communities. So I really appreciate those things. I mean, I even require students to sign up to go to those webinars as assignment. And so they study with the scholars out there, doing the work, not just reading the textbook. So I definitely say there is significant value for getting our students to access this kind of information. Any other comments or feedback? Michael, you want to say a few words if we're getting ready to conclude this session? Again, thank you so much, Michael, for starting the session on time. And this is a great teamwork, and I really appreciate it.
Well, and I, really appreciate your leadership on our mentorship committee and the things that you've done to put together this series of conversations. And we've all been there on the road trying to get plugged in for a meeting. So no worries, glad to do it. And certainly glad to kick it off with such a great panel, and just really appreciate Matt and Jason and Mary sharing your perspective today, and best wishes for continued success in what you guys are doing.
The last thing I need to get a confirmation from the storyteller again. And do you all agree if we can post this part on the YouTube video as we used to do? Is there any concern you have to get any clearance from your organization or anything? You're good?
I'm good with that. Now I can fulfill my ambition of being a YouTube star. Thank you.
Now, believe it or not, we do have people hit on those videos. We do, and the AAEA does a good job to share and just broadcast the availability of such a YouTube. And those of you who are teaching students, I know we would have loved to have more students here, but I think they're either in spring break or somewhere out there. So anyway, but if you're teaching students, these are excellent teaching notes. Instead of having a speaker particular for the class time, you got a couple of them available right here. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jessica. Any last thoughts or last words?
No. Thank you for everybody attending, though.
Well, thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thank you.